A Supreme Court justice says that our Constitution should not be the model for other nations around the world. We're going to be talking about it on Faith and Freedom. I'm Matt Staver, founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel. Joining me is Ron Miller, who is the Associate Dean at the Helms School of Government at Liberty University. And Ron, this is just an amazing situation where Justice Ginsburg is speaking over in Egypt in this new fledgling country that's trying to build a governmental structure. And she says that we shouldn't look to the United States Constitution. That's sort of old and passé. But more modern constitutions ought to be the ones we ought to look to. And she points specifically to South Africa, Canada, and then also the United Nations Human Rights Charter, but not the United States Constitution. Now, that's just outrageous in my view that a Supreme Court justice would not elevate our Constitution as the preeminent example for other countries to follow.
Well, it shows how much value they actually place in the oath that they take, because all of these elected officials who have issues with our Constitution all take an oath to uphold it, yet then they go out and they denigrate it, and this is just another example of that. What I find interesting is that she's pointing to examples that reflect the prevailing worldview and not the one that was developed by our founders, which understands human nature, understands natural law and the God of nature, and reflects that in how they administer the law.
Well, this is one of the sentences and some of the phrases that she told some of the officials in Egypt. She said, quote, "I would not look to the U.S. Constitution if I were drafting a Constitution in the year 2012, close quote. Instead, Justice Ginsburg referred to the constitutions of more supposedly progressive countries, like I said, South Africa, Canada, and the European Convention on Human Rights. She then goes on to state, quote, "I can't speak about what the Egyptian experience should be because I'm operating under a rather old constitution," close quote. Now, this clearly reveals a little bit about her philosophy about what she thinks about our own United States Constitution. So is it any wonder if she thinks our Constitution's not a good model, if she's operating under an old Constitution that she doesn't recommend others to follow, then when she gets ready to quote-unquote, interpret our Constitution in light of a case before her, how is she going to give it any real deference? How is she going to give it any real respect and really wrestle with the language and history? But rather how more revealing, I think it shows, is that she might read things into it from her own ideology and her own contemporary viewpoints.
Well, the fact is, from some of the constitutions she cites and the charter she cites, those are going to be her signpost when it comes to the rulings that she's going to make. And obviously that should be a warning sign to all of us in terms of the kind of rulings we can expect. She's not going to use our Constitution, which, whatever she may think of its age, has held up over time because it deals with timeless principles and timeless values. And she's saying, I don't acknowledge those. And in looking at these others, it's quite clear that she's taking an internationalist view and not a view that is unique to America and its exceptional nature.
Yeah, she's over in Egypt, and she's asked to give insight on the crucial topic of the post-Mubarak government there and what they need to do in terms of developing a new constitutional or a system of government there. And we've got a system of government that is the longest surviving government in the world, with the oldest constitution in the world. Every other country that she points to, whether it's South Africa or others, are not as old as we are. They've gone through revolutions, and in fact, it's more likely than not that countries go through revolutions and they change their constitutions. But America has been consistent through the couple of centuries. In that respect, it is being evidenced by history that it works, and those timeless principles transcend geographies and times and places and have been very successful. But instead of pointing to that timeless document or that document that governs the most powerful nation on the planet, she points to others. I think that for a sitting United States Supreme Court justice to make this kind of a statement, it clearly undermines the public's confidence in that justice and that person's ability to dispassionately and critically interpret our Constitution. And I think it undermines the institution of the Supreme Court itself.
Absolutely. But unfortunately, when you think about President Obama's past statements about the Constitution and the fact that it didn't adequately address things like what he calls redistributive justice and things of that sort, there was an interesting photo accompanying the article which showed him embracing Justice Ginsburg. And I think they probably embrace the same sorts of ideas when it comes to the Constitution.
And that phrase, redistributive justice and wealth and so forth, people have sort of forgotten about that. But when you go back during to the campaign of 2008, when he ran for president and when he was campaigning for president, you remember those statements where he actually had made those statements a long time before that in multiple situations where he talks about our Constitution. And it doesn't, and some of the things don't go far enough to redistribute wealth, or what he calls redistributive justice.
It's interesting because you look at the nominees that he has selected and have ended up on the Supreme Court, and you have to presume that at some level they may share Justice Ginsburg's view of our Constitution, and it just highlights the criticality of these appointments going forward.
Well, it really underscores why elections really do matter, because when you're electing a president, you're also electing not just someone who's going to be in the White House for the next 4 years, but all the cabinet members that are around that individual and all the other lower-level people within the administration, but more particularly those people who are going to survive the president 20, 30 years after the president leaves office, and those are particularly the people on the Supreme Court, not just on the Supreme Court, but on the federal courts of appeal and on the federal district courts. Those individuals survive long after the president's gone, and they have, in my view, a much greater impact on the president, on the country and the direction of the country, particularly those that serve on the U.S. Supreme Court.
It's one of those things that I think people aren't talking about a lot in the current campaign, because there is not going to be opportunities in this next term, perhaps, for additional Supreme Court appointments. And with the 5-4 balance somewhat tenuous with Justice Kennedy and I would say a centrist view of things, I think that it's going to be important going forward that whoever becomes the President of the United States has that respect for the Constitution, that understanding that it has upheld for 2 centuries, not because it's dated, but because it's timeless in its application of the law. I think that's going to be absolutely critical.
Well, I think the most important thing, both in the 2008 election as well as in the 2012 election coming up, is the future of the United States Supreme Court. And if you back up to the 2008 election, if there had been a president that would ultimately have appointed someone like, for example, a Scalia or particularly a Thomas, that kind of judicial restraint philosophy that Justice Thomas has, then you would ultimately have the demise of Roe versus Wade. There's no question about it. We're one vote away from having a majority on the Supreme Court to overturn Roe versus Wade. And that would have made the difference in 2008. So we were one election away, literally one election away, from overturning Roe versus Wade. And again, we're another election away from either potentially overturning it or for the rest of our lives having Roe versus Wade be the law of the land.
In fact, I think that with some of the laws that are being passed at the state level related to the issue of abortion, it's inevitable that Roe versus Wade is going to be revisited at some point in the very near future. And with some of the other lingering court decisions about issues related to family and other values, I think we're going to see these things go forward. So it's going to be critical in the next few years who sits on that court and who's going to be making decisions that are either going to be consistent with the law of the land or going to tie us in perpetuity with things that go against our core values.
Well, and speaking of Roe versus Wade, Justice Ginsburg, in a previous statement that she made with regards to abortion, she essentially said that she thought abortion was to get rid of the, quote, undesirables. That's her words, not my words. So, again, the philosophy of the justice comes out, and that is very critical as you're moving forward to interpret the Constitution. I think this coming election, by far, is the most critical election in our lifetime and in our current modern history with regards to the direction of the United States, and particularly the United States Supreme Court. Give us a call at Liberty Counsel at 1-800-671-1776. You can also visit our website at lc.org. Sign up for the Liberator. Right there, our monthly newsletter, the Liberty Alert as well, our email alert system. You'll need to sign up for that to get involved and make sure you know what's going on in the community, in the country, and then take action to do something about it. You can also ask for the book by David Barton called Original Intent. It's a book that is a fascinating read with regards to the founders and the intent of those founders in drafting the Constitution and the other founding documents that make America a great nation. You can also ask for the Patriot's Handbook on American Liberty, and that has the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, a letter from me, and also the Patrick Henry Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death speech. Go to libertycounselLC.org to order those documents.